if you want to do something great, you do it by small increments, you take small bets, and then if it's working, you keep going.
Welcome to Engaging Cities Fireside Chats. On each episode of the show, I talk to leaders who are paving the way in civic engagement in order to inspire listeners and share strategies that you can implement in your own community. This podcast is proudly supported by our sponsor, Conveo, the engagement platform for plans and policies. Check them out at konveo.com. I'm your host, Kelly Hickler, the community manager with Engaging Cities, as well as the founder of Cinovation Studio, which is dedicated to innovative civic education and engagement. Hey everyone, do you guys feel that? That spring is finally in the air? I don't know if it's just me, but January and February felt about 2 years long. So I'm looking forward to going outside again, hitting up some beer gardens here in Germany. Speaking of beer, it is something I discuss with my guest today, Rik Adamski, who is the president of Ash and Lime, as well as the co-founder of the Storefront Renaissance League. Rik talks about the power of small-scale interventions and the importance of focusing on people, not just places. On today's episode, we do a deep dive into practical steps that city leaders can take to incrementally drive real change in their communities. Before we jump into the discussion, I wanted to announce that we officially launched the Community Engagement Interest Group with APA. It's open to everyone. You don't need to be an APA member to join. It's free. So if you're someone who's interested in getting more involved in your community, please join us. We're going to be at the national conference in Denver, so look for us there. We're planning some fun activities that we'll post the details of soon. Before then, you can also join our virtual meet and greet on March 20th. Details are on the website. The URL is a bit long, so I'm not going to say it, but I'll show it here on the screen, and I've linked it in the show notes. You can also find it at engagingcities.org at the bottom of the homepage. So without further ado, let's hear from Rik. Hi, Rik.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for joining our podcast today.
Wonderful. I'm very excited to be on it. I did get to listen to a few of them, as well as kind of a podcast of highlights that you had put together, which was quite nice. So I'm excited to be part of it, and hopefully can help to give some people some useful ideas in our conversation.
Oh, good. I'm so glad to hear that you've actually listened to some episodes and you watched the highlight reel.
I did listen to the highlights, yeah. So
Oh, good. You did your homework. You get an A+.
tried to.
You get a
A
gold
plus.
star for Rik. I'm gonna write it down.
Wonderful. I need more of those, definitely.
So, Rik, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background. Who are you?
So I am somebody who has his master's degree in city planning. After I graduated from college, I did a few things, was a little bit directionless, and several people who were very close to me realized that the city planning thing was probably something that I could do. So I was living in Chicago at the time, got my master's degree in Chicago, decided that it was a good idea to graduate in 2009, which it wasn't, of course, and ended up eventually moving to Texas because I could find work and move to Fort Worth, Texas. And long story short, when I came to Texas, but when I was in Chicago, I had worked for these organizations that we might call think tanks in some ways.
Okay.
The American Planning Association, their Planning Advisory Service, the Congress for the New Urbanism was headquartered there. This group, Center for Neighborhood Technology, which is best known for the Housing and Transportation Affordability Index. I think that at the time, my trajectory was to become kind of a super planning geek who would, had a whole encyclopedia of information about planning. And met a bunch of people and came into contact with a bunch of people when I was in Texas who really changed the way that I looked at planning, and who saw it as much less maybe theoretical and saw physical places as a part of it, but maybe not the most important part. Like the we might think of it as the way that you might see a drummer for a band that you if you don't have a great drummer, it's going to be a lot harder to come out with great songs. But the drummer isn't the band, right? So the physical place isn't really the only thing that we do in planning. We need to think about people. We need to think about programming. We need to think about how money is invested and how money is spent. And I very much took on what we might call this bottom up, maybe incremental, maybe inclusionary type of planning, that says, in essence, if you have a plan on the shelf and it has pretty pictures, but it's not really implemented, it doesn't really help. And if you have this huge convention center and there's not normally human beings around it and it doesn't create a great place for people, then overall, it's not really a success for your downtown. So to start to think at the scale of the neighborhood, the district, the corridor, and to start to say, what do we need to do to get things started? What are the next 30 steps we need to take? What are the 20% of ways that we can spend our resources that might get 80% of the results? So I'm thinking this way. I'm meeting these other people who are thinking this way. There's this group that then called themselves Next Gen within the Congress of the New Urbanism. I started to meet this guy, Chuck Marone, and he was this kind of 1-2 person organization called Strong Towns at the time.
Okay, yeah.
That was kind of, a very small type of thing, but we're seeing these ideas evolve alongside each other. And I'm like, I want in on this. I did this thing and when I was working with this for the city of Fort Worth, did this thing called a Better Block. I'm absolutely blown away. This is in this neighborhood, Riverside Ray Street, that at the time there had been very little momentum, but people saw a lot of opportunities there. The first thing we did was literally 2-hour block cleanup in a neighborhood that looked unloved before. All of a sudden looked like people cared about it. And I, with my master's in urban planning and all the books I'd read and all these smart people I met, I wouldn't have noticed that difference, right, at the time. And none of the books that I read or none of the inquiries that I got or anything, at no point did anybody say, hey, maybe the first step is to make sure that there's not weeds and garbage on the sidewalk, right? Like,
Yeah,
and so from that, I started to think very differently about planning, and not that the long-term plans aren't important or that the big things aren't important, but if you don't get the details right, the big things won't matter. And then I moved to Dallas, and at the time, it's different now, but at the time, they had literally invested, I think, $13 billion in the downtown over the years, astronomical amounts of money, with these maybe skyscrapers that, they needed to be fixed up or whatever. So they spent this money. But at the time, you couldn't get a cup of coffee, a decent cup of coffee on a Sunday in downtown Dallas.
really.
Yeah, the human experience, 13 years ago, 12 years ago in downtown Dallas, the human experience of the place was pretty desolate, despite all of this money being put in. And it wasn't until they really started saying, hey, we can't just throw money in and have it be a substitute for caring about the human experience. You would have seen the downtown from a distance at the time and said, wow, this is so exciting. There's all these glossy skyscrapers, all these bright lights. And you come downtown and the place is desolate. Right. And it was extreme amounts of money that had been put in, with, until about that time, very little concern with the question of, but how does the human being experience this place? Which at the time was very much a contrast with Fort Worth, by the way, where their downtown, You had a couple of billionaires who had literally bought up parts of, the most vibrant of their downtown in the 80s, the Bass Brothers, right? But the way that they fixed it up was literally, how do we make sure that as people walk around this block, that every inch of it is vibrant and engaging and alive, right? So you had pour a ton of money into it and not care about the human experience versus pour a lot, but not as much money into it. But it's about, how do human beings experience this place?
Okay.
So we see these contrasts. So I get very bought into these ideas, and I get invited to a conference in Louisville, Kentucky. Very small conference. It's invite only. There are, I think, 27 people, many of whom I'm still in contact with very much. Many of whom I see every year when I go to the CNU National Conference. And we all had to do our presentation about the future of American cities. And I did mine on a pop-up retail program in downtown Dallas that is only on paper, that is still never materialized, but that would have been utterly and completely transformative to the downtown. But other people did things. Some of them got into these very kind of dense theories. These were very smart people. Some of them, it was very simple. Here's what I'm doing in my community. But I'm like, the theme kept being the same, right? And so I started saying, okay, these are these principles that we got. It's like, do what you can with the resources you have. Take a step, and if that works, take the next step. Meaningfully engage the community. You find assets and fill in gaps, right? And we think we're so clever that we don't need to do these things. As you can see, if you see the state of our towns and cities, we're not that clever. We're not as clever as we think we are, or our towns and cities wouldn't be as dead as they are. In many cases. So it's like getting the simple things right, going from the ground up. At the time, they had said, invite some people from your city. So when we get to day 3, I have a couple of other people from my city come in. And this guy, Scott Polikoff, turns to us and says, you should start your own business based on the ideas that we see here. And I don't know if I should thank Scott or curse him, but I did, in fact, do that. Probably depends on the day. My stepfather wrote a book called The Risk Paradox. And he was successful working in businesses, but he never started his own business. But he wrote a book about risk. And one of the things that he's figured out and told me is that almost anybody would not start their own business if they knew how hard it was. And that's especially when you're starting a business and you're doing something very, which we can now say is like very radical, right? Going to a city and saying, you would think it might be easier to go to a city and say, don't start with spending $1 million, start with spending 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, and figure out things that you can actually do, break things down into smaller steps. Honestly, I'm convinced that if I had put the energy that I've had into convincing cities to spend $1 million on me, that I would have probably gotten more sales. It's just it's so counterintuitive to them to say, start with what you have, look at what you have, take the next step and focus on metrics. It's not the way that cities are trained to think. The way that I think about economic development, the idea of even past the quality of life, ultra small business stuff, which should be much more a part of economic development than it is. But even thinking of gardening what you have instead of hunting what you don't, or even think of, being a resource for whoever is there and figuring out what government can do better than anybody else and how you do it. I don't care if they're from Timbuktu or they're from this town. We're going to help you to build your business rather than bribing people to come in. All of these types of things are so different than the way that cities and towns think. That, building up the clientele that we have and building up the portfolio that we have has been very hard. And innately in this, and going back to the theme of engagement, there's an innate humility that comes with this approach that you almost need to have 8 or 9 case studies to point to even be able to say, look, these are success stories that we have.
Yeah.
Why do I say that? If we've done our job really, really well, very few people are going to care that we were ever there. If you know what I'm saying. Because like, okay, so if I go into, or a few people will remember, but it's not going to be, they're not going to say, hey, Rick came in and did this, or the Ash and Lime team came in and did this. That's not the point. I haven't done my job then. The point is, you are going to do this. And I happen to be an expert in some tools that I can help to accelerate your progress.
Okay.
So, and I'm here to, you know, to involve you and to immerse you, all of these synonyms of the word engage, right? When we say engagement, in this so that you can help to take the next step. So you're not really going to care that some consultant came in and did a strategy. What you're going to care about is, hey, we were really struggling. And then all of a sudden, these developers came in and these property owners came in and they started doing these really cool things. And we came to believe in ourselves again.
Oh, I like that.
So,
Yeah, so
right?
they feel like it's their project that they did with maybe a little bit of your help.
Is. I mean, as a consultant, we could bring in a team and we could do one or two things like, but even then, even if we do some big shiny, demonstration project, right? It's if that's the only product, if that's the only result of this, then this was just a fun event, right? If what we do doesn't inspire them or inform them or give them tools,
Mhm.
then it's not meaningful because I'm going to go back to Dallas. I'm
Mhm.
not living in your community. I'm not there every day. And I'm not the person who's going to make things right. And even if what I do is completely transformative, it's on the backs of the people who spent 20 years there being like, I'm gonna have this diner here and I'm gonna open it up. And I don't care if everybody says this place is a wasteland because, in 20 years, maybe it won't be a wasteland. So the 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 constant reminders of humility um are so important to this. And humility is there's shortcuts that you could take that could get you to success faster than humility. In
Okay.
other words,
Yeah.
I could repackage all of the things that are success stories under what I've done, and I could do a big, I could have a big presentation and I could make it all about me, and it would be a shortcut to success. I'm sure that I could sell my stuff better. I've also seen people who have done that and have fallen very hard
Mm.
and have gotten very big criticism, and ultimately they burn out because it's like, you know what, there's things I'm really good at, there's things I'm not really good at. I'm very, I believe of the people who can get here within an hour, I'm the best for this community. Like, I'm very, very confident in my abilities, but I'm not an expert in this community. I'm someone who's doing his best. And so we're partners in this,
Mhm.
and this is about you and not me. And ultimately, I think that's a lot more rewarding path. If I didn't want to take that path, it would be, the other path that would probably make more sense is to either have a cushy city job or to figure out how to get myself super rich as a developer. So, the path of let's do this with integrity and let's do this with humility
Yes.
is not an easier one. And I can see how it might be tempting for people to do another path that's flashier, but ultimately emptier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's very well said. You did mention briefly the name of your company, but I want to go back the name
Sure.
of your company and talk about Ash and Lime and where did that come from? What is that referring to?
So that was the co-founder of the company, who's not she's working independently now, Amanda Popkin. came up with the concept. We actually had a different name, but someone threatened to sue us because it was too close over here. They're like, okay, well, we still have a DBA, but we're not going to use that name. So she came up with ash and lime are the ingredients of Roman concrete. And so, the idea is simple ingredients that have stood the test of time in creating enduring places. Some people take it very literally and think we're a construction company. It's a name that I don't love the curb value of, so to speak. Like it doesn't curb appeal, I guess is what I'm looking for. It doesn't have, people don't really get what it is, but once you explain it, they love it. And look, like the way that we're thinking about cities, we didn't invent this. This is timeless. I talk about strong towns. If as Chuck Maroon, the founder of Strong Towns, has evolved his thinking, he's come to realize, all of this is just timeless stuff that we had abandoned in this particular society post World War II. And that this bottom up incremental stuff, this isn't an add-on. This isn't something that, you do in some context, but no, this is how cities are built. So you could say, well, the Empire State Building wasn't built incrementally. It was this big, gigantic. Yes, it was. Someone built shacks, and then they built bigger buildings, and then they built bigger buildings. And then 100+ years ago, the market value was so intense that they said, we're going to build as high as we possibly can because of this. So even if you want to do something as big as the Empire State Building, it has to be done incrementally in order for it to work. If you want to contrast with that, think of the Burj Dubai, which is even taller than the Empire State Building. The Empire State Building has been around for 100 years. Is that tower in Dubai going to be around in 100 years? I don't think so. I think there's a much bigger chance that the Empire State Building, which was in fact built incrementally, which was in fact a result of bottom-up thinking, I think there's a much better chance that it's going to see its 200th birthday and still be filled with something than this tower seeing its 100th. So these are, even if you want to do something grand, even if you want to do something huge, the way to do it, the great cities of the world that I think are sustainable in the long run, were done by increment. And that's how you do these things. You make small bets and you build up as you go over time. So you think of it's like if you need to have commerce, right? So you've got a downtown and you have a bunch of empty storefronts. And then we can talk a little as a resource about the Storefront Renaissance League that I co-founded recently, right? But it's like you have this big vacant storefront and you need to get small businesses in, right? And then you have a lot of other vacant storefronts. Like to think like, let's just fill them all up with these businesses, that are all going to have 10-year leases. That's a very big risk for a small business. But if you say, let's take the biggest storefront that we have and we're going to divide it into 10 businesses and they're all going to be tiny and we're going to test ideas and we're also going to have a farmer's market outside. And we'll see if we can incubate some of this stuff. And we're also going to do some pop-up retail, right? It's like, this is not new. None of this is new, right? This is ancient. Like cities didn't, the idea that Rome wasn't built in a day is a cliche for a reason. So what cities did is they had a market and then they started to have more demand and then they built things up and up and up and eventually you had something permanent, right? So it's like these principles are timeless. And if you want to do something great, you do it by small increments, you take small bets, and then if it's working, you keep going. Same principle. It's like we were, working in Seguin, Texas on their downtown plan. And we saw something that, in my opinion, was very clear that we could shut down 2 blocks of this street and make it pedestrian. That was my opinion. A lot of other people didn't think that's clear. Now, there's 2 things for this. One is that you don't want to do something that a lot of people disagree with. The other is, as much as our ecos would like to pretend otherwise, planners are often wrong. So we've seen, for example, in the 80s and in the 80s and the 70s, we had all these streets that we shut down. We knew it could be pedestrianized, it turned out that we were wrong, right? So I'm pretty confident that we could do it, but I might be wrong. So let's do something instead. Let's take these 2 blocks and let's say, hey, we're going to recommend you do some design features, we're do it a little bit of branding, do some art, do some pavement treatments. And when there's a special event, let's make it pedestrian only for these events. And let's let this thing evolve. And then if it turns out that it makes sense, let's go forward. So again, it's like you're respecting the citizens because the citizens are concerned, but you're also going back to humility and saying, I don't think we need this street to circulate. I also don't think losing these parking spaces will be the end of the world, but I understand how often planners have been wrong in the past. And I understand that I have my own bias. So we're going to figure out a way to do this at low risk and low cost. And then we're going to keep going if it's working. And that should be throughout our principles what we should be doing.
Yeah, that is a really smart approach. And I think we're seeing more cities starting to feel more comfortable doing it that way instead of the typical, well, let's spend $1 million on not even on building anything. Let's spend $1 million on a plan, on
Right.
studies to have studies if we can take away the parking spaces, and then you spent $1 million to have a plan that maybe never even gets implemented.
Right.
Where you could spend a fraction of that and, hey, let's test it. Let's test out taking away these parking spaces during some events or for a limited amount of time, see how it goes. And if it's not working, okay, well, then we abandon it and try something else.
I saw in Los Angeles I don't quote me on the exact numbers here, but it was like there was a street that like basically dead-ended. It was basically a stub, and it was parallel to another street, and it was parallel to this park. And they did like something along the order of a $500,000 study of what would happen if they pedestrianized this street. And they had a ribbon cutting and everything. I'm like, man, what a hustle that is. What an obvious scab you have when even at the end of your $500,000 study, it was literally about that amount. You don't actually know what will happen. A, it's probably going to be fine, but B, you would be much more effective to like, you could literally have, put some cones out and have your planner ones out in the area and like count traffic and maybe interview people and see how many people walk or ride bikes on there. And you could find out anything that you want. These studies are, kind of largely a grift. There's definitely times when you need longer term studies. I'm not going to say like you don't need to have a comprehensive plan for your community, because of course you do. There's things that are not just immediate actions that you have to figure out infrastructure and figure out transportation and figure out your zoning and other long-term things. But in terms of revitalization, if you're not trying things, then you're not doing anything. And it's also like, there's so many ways to reach your objectives, right? Like we need a park downtown and we're going to put it in the bonds and we're going to get all this federal money and we're going to have a park downtown in 2029 and we'll have our park master plan. It's like, well, what was your objective? Because it may very, very well be that if you put out some string lights and make some furniture and make a stage and have some bands come on Saturday nights or have a movie night on Saturday nights, you could achieve a lot of things that you were hoping to achieve with that park. Like it wasn't a park that you needed. It was a place for people to go, maybe something for locals to do on a Saturday night. And that park is not going to give that to you. The bottom line of it all is that if you spend the big money, but don't spend the little money, you're not going to get what you want. Just like if you do a plan, but you don't figure out, like you don't hold yourself accountable and responsible for the plan happening, you're not going to get what you want. And what you're going to get is a jaded citizenry. And then by the time someone like me comes along, I've got like half my energy has to be to prove to people that I'm different than the last 5 consultants who came in and did the plans that sit in the shelf for 10 years each.
Hmm.
You know, oh, we've already got a downtown plan. That didn't happen, you know? So it's like, no, we don't need a plan as much as we need to do things, and we need to accomplish things, and we need to help the most productive people to have the tools and the morale boost to show that they can do things. When that happens, it is magical. It creates an entirely different narrative. See the narrative that's created if you spend millions of dollars on infrastructure versus the narrative that's created if you have the best barbecue, you know, one of the best barbecue places in the state of Texas in your downtown. That's a narrative shifter. That's a narrative shifter because one person felt empowered to invest their time, energy, and money in a place. You know, if you have a diner that's been around for 100 years and you make that diner awesome, that people will visit for that. They don't care about your infrastructure. They care about the human experience that you have there. And it's like we have one of the things that I've thought about a lot recently is about means and end, right? And people, we have these very grand means
Hmm.
to these very pedestrian ends, right? So it's like, we're going to spend all this money on this big convention center downtown, and we're going to have a revitalized downtown. But if you talk to them, there's no magic in it. There's no spark in it. It's like, what we should be doing is saying, we're going to go down on the ground. We're going to figure out what's going on, and we're going to figure out the next 10 things that we can do that are going to make this downtown so extraordinary that people will tell their grandchildren about the experiences that we help to create, right? Like,
Yeah.
because they confuse, we're going to spend all this money with we're thinking big. You're not thinking big. You don't even know what you want. You don't even know what you're trying to do. You're not thinking of creating places that will be so amazing that people will be like, you know what? I'm going to go to college for 4 years, but I'm going to come back here because of what I see in this town. And I'm going to fight for this place because it's wonderful. And that to me, it's like create a place that your young people who are most talented, whether they're college bound or not college bound, that your most ambitious and most talented young people will want to be there. That's your inspiration. And we're so far from that with this grandiose just nonsense that we have.
Yeah. What a great goal for a city to have that, yeah, people who grew up there would want to come back eventually and raise their own family there.
I had there's a community that I did a little bit of work on as a sub consultant back in 2017. And I came back with this Storefront Renaissance League that I started. It's our first project that I did last year. Corsicana, Texas. Corsicana is about an hour south of Dallas. It is the original Western oil town, right? It's the first place that they had major discoveries of oil in Texas, but really in the whole west of the Mississippi. So the story of Texas as we know it and of the West as we know it would be completely different if not for what was started in Corsicana. It was also, in addition to being an oil town, it was also a cotton town. So you can imagine the level of wealth that you have there. And you can imagine all of these wonderful storefronts, many of which surprisingly are filled. They've done a great job there. But, you know, still a sense, especially in 2017, that the downtown wasn't really reaching its potential. Certainly back then, even to a
Mhm.
degree now, although there's been a lot of progress made. But you have these huge opportunities, as you might imagine, because given that wealth, you've got this massive downtown, you have multiple sub-districts, you've got, you know, basically 18 blocks of storefronts if you add them all up in this
Okay.
like town of 25,000 people. So back in 2017, when I was part of this larger team, we went over and we were talking to a group of 8 of the most involved honor students. And it's like, where are you going to go to school? And it was either Texas A&M,
Mhm.
University of Texas in Austin, or UTA, which is in Arlington, basically halfway between Dallas and Fort Worth. So these big schools. And it was like, are you coming back to Corsicana? And 8 of them were kind of like, probably 7 of them were probably not. 8 of them was like, well, I want to see my family. It'd be a good place to raise kids, blah, blah, blah. So I said, okay, just on a whim, my last question, just as we were about to laugh, I was Columbo. One last thing. Um, how many of you would seriously consider moving back here if downtown Corsican were hopping? It was like 8 hands went up. 8 hands. I'm like, and they were looking at each other. They were like, it was like, boom, yes. And I was like, this is astounding. And I'm like, same job market, same social attitudes, right? It's like, well, but we can create our own jobs, and there will be more job opportunities if more people are circulating, and we'll be subject to different social attitudes. If people are driving in from Dallas or Houston all the time and stopping by here, like, we'll be able to interact with different things. And then all of a sudden, like, well, yeah, these are 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds who are about to go to a very exciting place for 4, 5, 7 years around a lot of young people, right? They're not thinking, hey, it'd be fun for me to do at age 25, go and not have excitement. Of course so place after place where I've talked to young people and where there was a perception that the young people who had options were leaving, they said that if the downtown were hopping, that they would reconsider it. And I've asked this questions in other forums before, going to a community college and saying, hey, if we had a plan that would really activate this community college, would this change would this affect your decision of whether to come back next year? And I'm asking this question going, of course it's not going to affect it, right? They're going for, and I have people saying like, yeah, we're not being prepared for college because it's not just about academics, it's about the experience, and we're not being prepared for the social experience of college.
Oh.
Well, okay, I wasn't expecting that. University of Houston, working on an arts district plan. So University of Houston, one of the largest universities in the country, has this big arts district that has incredible resources. And unlike more than any other arts district on any campus in the United States, it has evolved organically since the 1970s. This wasn't top down. So when we go over there and we want to help them with the arts district, it's like, you already have an arts district. How do we help to make it extraordinary? It's like if we were like, hey, I've got these eggs and I've got this cheese and I've got these mushrooms and this bacon.
Yeah.
I've got a stove here. How do I make an omelet? It's like, wow, you just need someone to come from outside and say, here's how you make the omelet, right?
Okay.
And we're talking to students, and it's like how much it matters to their experience, how much these same things matter, right? It's like, okay, so we're in this theater program, but we're only performing for other theater people. How much of a difference would it make if the choral people are showing up to your performances? Or if the musicians are showing up to, it would make all the difference in the world. Like, it's not, this would make my experience 20% better. It's like I've seen this in rich places. I've seen this in poor places. I've seen this in small towns, in big cities. Like, people do care about this stuff, especially young people. They do care about the experience of place, and places are not fighting for that experience, and they're fighting for something else, and they have a misaligned set of goals that is not actually helping them. They aren't moving towards what they need through their actions as cities or as institutions or as colleges or as universities. They're completely underestimating how much the young people in particular care about that stuff. And I suspect, incidentally, that the old people, probably older than those people, are probably resigned more than anything. That's not that they don't necessarily care, it's that they're resigned to, like, this is the way my community is. I think everybody wants to have pride in their place. Everybody wants to have, most people, they want to have a place that they can show people. They want to have a place that they can brag about. They want to have a place that they can experience something wonderful without having to go on vacation. So that's what this is about. And that's how this stuff should be framed. And it's really, I tell people this. I'll talk to someone who's in a town of 20,000 people, 15,000 people. And I'm like, if you want to just have a big fancy plan from a firm that, will give you you'll impress your colleagues because of the firm that you have the plan. You might not be able to afford that of a town of 20,000, or it might be a stretch on your resources.
Right.
But if you want to bring in the best people in the country for this type of way of thinking, if you want to bring in the best, my business partner, Jaime Zareta, is the best storefront expert in the country as far as I'm concerned. He literally wrote the book on it. I can have him fly to your town in Texas. I have people who are, I'm in a co-working space right now. Monty Anderson, the incremental developer guy. I work in his space. He's in the Dallas area, but he co-founded Neighborhood Evolution. He co-founded the Incremental Development Alliance before that. I can bring him in. He's the best that I know of in the country at this stuff, at figuring out how to help people become small neighborhood scale developers. I can bring him into your town in Texas. The people who are the best tactical urbanism people, the people who are the best small business support people, like your little town, we can get these people to come in and put an eye on, and I can remotely get the best people in the world to put an eye on it. This is undervalued in the sense that the best people can come and give you a real fighting chance of real self-reliance, which was always incredibly important, but now is much, much more important, right? You could, maybe 5 years ago, maybe even during COVID, you could get away with banking on being reliant on the feds. I would not recommend that right now. I don't think we know what the heck is going to happen for the federal government over the next 4 years. I don't think we can predict it. And I think that we would be crazy not to say, instead of just saying we're going to spend unlimited money on a plan so that we can say we have a plan, we need to buckle down and we need to figure out a strategy. And we need to say, we're going to spend less, but we're going to get more results. And that would sound impossible if I hadn't seen it done. And if I hadn't seen communities, for the most part, their habit is to not do that because they don't take that seriously. There's not, I don't think, going to be a bailout the way there was during COVID. During COVID, I saw a lot of communities that, even when it wasn't clear how things were going to go, they had a wait and see attitude, and it turned out okay for them. Their consumers, so to speak, their citizens, would be probably a better way to say it, were able to get money to still spend on retail. They still got their sales tax money. Their small businesses got bailed out so that they didn't have, Main Street with 10 small businesses empty. You had ARPA and other stimulus funding that actually gave them more for their operations. So they could do nothing and still be thriving. I don't see that happening now. Maybe it will, but I don't see it happening. I think they have to be much more conscious, and I think they have to ask themselves, where do we start with our first 20% of the resources that we're going to put into revitalization, and how do we get 80% of the results? And I know enough to know that that's possible, and I know enough to know that, like, the people who are the best in that who are the consultants are available. They're not going to charge you $300,000 to come into town. They can actually come in.
Yeah, okay. So if you can share when we get to the end of our program here, maybe share some of the or re-share the names of some of these folks, and I can add in the show notes links to their websites and contact info and things, because I think, hey, maybe some of our listeners will take you up on that
I hope so.
and reach out to you and some of your colleagues. Why not?
I hope so. I think that this is the time to do it. And one of the things that I feel really happy about is that we're building. I mentioned this Storefront Renaissance League that we have.
Yeah,
And
right.
the idea of that is, so, basically, we figured out very quickly that the storefront is kind of obviously the storefront is kind of what we might call the seam between the public realm and the private realm, right? If you as a city are going to invest in in giving money to somebody who's private, right? The fairest way to do it, the most effective way to do it, and the most reasonable way to do it is to focus on the storefronts, right? So, for example, in the city of Dallas, I'd mentioned that we had this storefront program that ended up being on paper but didn't happen. And the idea is that we would kind of white box these storefronts, meaning bring it to the point where there could be productive use.
Mm.
And then on one of the conditions is if it's vacant, that's okay. If you can't lease out, that's okay. But you have to do pop-up retail. So this would have been about $8 million, which is a lot of money, but in the scheme of what downtown Dallas was doing to help, high rises with asbestos, it's nowhere near as much money as it thinks. And what you would have had is basically on the five that you have three primary main streets that are parallel to each other in downtown Dallas, right? You have Main, you have Commerce, and you have Elm. And then you would go a block past that. And then you have two major parks. So this whole area, every single storefront would have been filled and vibrant, right? That is as responsible of an investment you can make in taxpayer money as you could imagine, right? And so long story short is that the Storefront Renaissance League, which Jaime and I founded, one of the ideas of this is that we can help to bring in an A team of people who can come in depending on what the context is. So, you have myself who's, I've come from a planning perspective, but this very ultra neighborhood scaled fine grained perspective that I've developed over the years. But you also have Jaime, who has come from, he's actually he's studied architecture, he studied historic preservation, he's done, planning internationally and so forth. But the idea is that he has specifically come up with an expertise in the storefronts to help to design them and stuff like that. I mentioned Monty Anderson and the Neighborhood Evolution Group. So he and I bring him in on places. So he and his crew come in and they'll say, okay, how do we find the people who are the locals who might have some time, who might have some money, who might have some energy, and who can help to take it to the next step. So that's another person we're working with. We have Marcy Goodwin. Marcy is, she's in Illinois, kind of close to Peoria, Illinois. And she is basically about how do we help to get the small towns, how do we help to support the small businesses in the small towns, and has had huge success with that. We've got this group Zero Empty Spaces, Evan Snow, who's part of the coalition, and he has been very successful. He's based in Florida, so we have people all over the country. Okay. Alvin has been very successful in his group in taking vacant storefronts that people might have and bringing in art studios. So he'll rent it for a small space to artists, and then we'll have events and things like that in the way that things have evolved. Kathleen Minogue, who is, a big crowdfunding expert, right? So, and she's figured out ways to really effectively do crowdfunding at the neighborhood level. So these are the types of people who are in our immediate network who can come in. And as you can imagine, even with a small town budget, especially with the types of economic development budgets they have in Texas, we can come in and we can help to tailor that. And, more broadly, depending on the specific context, there are certainly other people as well. For example, and this is not a group that you can pull in as affordably as you once could because they're very, very prosperous. But if you look at Mike Leiden and Tony Garcia, who came up with, Street Plans Collaborative, they're able to come in still within budgets that you can do and help to get you some real results on the ground. And then I noticed that you had Deb Brown recently on your.
I was gonna ask if you knew Deb.
I do know Deb, and and I think that she's the type of person who can work in very small towns and stuff like that, and can can be very effective in working within local budgets. So I think that there's in the end, there's a lot of people who are like that. Becky McCrae also works very closely with Deb. And I didn't listen to that whole podcast because I wanted to hear new people who I didn't know. So I don't know if she mentions Becky, but
Yes, she does.
yeah, I would assume she would have. So, these are people who, even more than me, right? Even as action oriented as I am, I'm as action oriented as any planner. They work in these very small towns, and I'm very action oriented. But my approach is, let's make a plan, and then let's make this a very action oriented plan. Those two are even more like, let's just get started. Let's just do something.
We'll make
So,
a
and I,
plan later to justify what we did.
yeah, in some sense, yeah. And I have a little bit of that, but it's not as much in my DNA. Like, I've worked with people who are more like that. And I have a lot of respect for that approach, but I'm one level less hands-on, if it makes sense to you.
Okay.
But we're still very hands-on, but it's like, I want to make a plan and I want to create a strategy over the next, so that what your roadmap is.
Okay.
And so that you have tools that, it's like, maybe some things that I might see make sense right now that you're going to need to have a little bit in the future. Another thing, I think of the work that we did in Portland, Texas, where one of the things that I'm proudest of, we were working in this area, Old Town. Portland, by the way, is right across the bridge from Corpus Christi. Even most Texans don't know that there's a Portland in Texas. But they had this area, Old Town. It's kind of, at the time, a place that they had a grid and there was a bunch of stuff there, but it had never really been like a really cohesive main street. It was clear to see where you would start for a main street, but it was a community that never really formulated one. It was like kind of the time in history where they would have been a main street. You had hurricanes hit. So it was like a little bit loosey-goosey. There was a lot of stuff there. So we had to figure out, how to get momentum on a downtown, where you had a grid, but you didn't really have a downtown. And so we helped to start this thing, the Portland Old Town Association. And the idea was, hey, you either need to create an association, or if there's one and it's not operating on all cylinders, you need to make it happen on all cylinders, because, again, this can't all be top down. This can't only be the responsibility of the city to lead revitalization efforts. You have to have everybody on board, and you have to have the business owners, the property owners have to start to build the momentum together with you.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, your challenge is to come up with one small change that either local government or a consultant could do to improve how they engage with the community.
Um, Look up synonyms of the word engage, and at least make sure that you're trying to do that. So, the examples, it's like, how are you involving people? How are you engrossing people? How are you immersing people? And try to do that. That's a principle that I'll give you, because once you start from that principle, most cities that say, oh yeah, we've been doing community engagement. No, you really haven't, probably. So how are you actually getting people involved and co-working with them? That's kind of, I'll give that as an ethos. And I'll say that once you operate with that ethos, then it becomes a lot of what you're doing. If you're working on a downtown, you're working on neighborhood, it becomes, how can we help people to give them tools and resources that they can work with us to help move the needle positively. So, so to give a more specific example, just a very simple one, look at how you can work with them to help make their window displays more engaging. I'll give that as just a specific example of one thing that you can do, but it's tied to a much larger ethos. So to say, okay, if we have this place, can we work with them? Can we give them a little resources, a little money, a little design guidance, so that if they have, a dress shop, that we can have something engaging for them? Or if they have a bookstore, how can we make it something that people are going to walk into? Can we do something that makes it better lit at night so that it's more connected? If we have a window display that is something that might be boring, like, oh, well, nobody wants to pass by a window display of a a lawyer's office, right? Well, can we do something that's a theme of justice, right? Can we have some art? Can we have our 5, title companies? Like, what can we do that's going to tie to the history of this place? That maybe shows, maybe the old Sanborn maps, right? Like that shows like how we did things here, or maybe shows the town under development, right? What can we do that's creative? So I'll give you that as a specific. Window displays is one specific thing that if you had 10 places change their window displays, especially at night, that you would help to move the needle. But the bigger principle than that is figure out how you can help people to do the things that are going to make a difference. And so to think of engagement not only as you kind of checking items off a list, or you maybe talking at them, or maybe kind of going through the same old exercises. It's like, how can we work with people to actually make a difference together? And then maybe what I would add is, even for more traditional forms of engagement, show up in places that people aren't used to, so that you can reach out to new audiences. Everybody will tell you we have engagement fatigue, right? Well, that means that whatever you're doing is not a synonym of the word engage, because nobody is fatigued of actually being engaged. That doesn't make sense. They might be fatigued of being talked to. They might be fatigued of showing up at a meeting and doing the same exercises 20 times and nothing happening, but they're not fatigued of getting engaged. You're not doing it. But also that you need to figure out, okay, where do we reach out to these people? It's like, I'm doing work that this community, Jersey Village, Texas, which is a suburb of, inner ring suburb of Houston. And it's like, we showed up at the pub, or we showed up at the Christmas event. And, so it's like, how do we figure out ways to talk to people? How do we figure out communities that are typically under engaged? And then how do we do a lot more that's like informal, right? Because you're going to figure out what the real information is by hanging out with the guy who owns the hamburger shop, or the woman who owns the dress shop. Like, those are the people who actually have the information you need and who will give you the support. And you're going to need to talk with them in a way that's largely informal and unstructured, because you've put aside time to do that. I might have answered your question, but I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. No, that's great. So what I'm hearing is to not start with the multi-million dollar investment in redeveloping the entire main street. Start with 10 window displays.
Start with 10 window displays. Start with doing a pop-up retail program. Start with having some cool public art, having some murals. Start with figuring out how to better, promote things. Start with figure out ways to activate spaces that you have, or create new public spaces. Start with figuring out where there's a gap and saying, let's put in some food trucks to fill in that gap, so that people naturally will walk over to this other part of the downtown that they had been ignoring. Start with, hey, there's somebody here who wants to open up a brewery. Like one project we did where, in Garland, Texas, very early on, where we helped a developer to incubate a brewery for less than $1,000, and it became very successful. Intrinsic Brewery in downtown Garland, right? So it was like, we didn't need to pay somebody a ton of money. We just needed to say, hey, let's have you come in. We'll put in a band. We'll put out a logo. We'll have, some food trucks out here, and we'll see if we can get people to show up for little samples of free beer. And, you have several hundred people who show up for samples of free beer. As an aside, when restaurants say the food truck is going to kill their business, if you give people small samples of beer and have one food truck on the back and have 400 or 500 people show up, the restaurants turn out to do fine.
Oh, yeah, that's a great
I want
point.
some more beer. I want some. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very, yeah. So at the risk of doing too much of an aside, food trucks are going to legitimately hurt the restaurants if the food trucks are not connected with something that brings in new people. If you have food trucks
Okay.
and you bring in new people, the food trucks are not going to hurt the restaurants. They're going to help them. people are going to be like, I don't want to wait in line for one food truck. I'm going to go and figure out what's actually open so that I can just get some food.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that sounds like a good side podcast. Let's see, what else do I want to touch on before ending? I'm just thinking through.
Well, I'll tell you a little. I'll tell you a little bit about a couple initiatives that I'm very involved with
Oh yeah,
that
okay,
are
that's great.
interconnected. And so one of them I alluded to briefly. I've actually both of them I alluded to briefly, but I think that they connect with each other very well. Um, this one of the things that I'm doing lately is called the Storefront Renaissance League. If you go to storefrontleague.com, that has a website. It's pretty new, so the website could probably be a little more polished, but it tells a little bit about us, the partners in it, but it also has a form that people can fill out if they'd like to give us some more information and have us follow up. And the idea of this is that we can go into places, into a downtown or into a city neighborhood, even into a strip suburban shopping center, perhaps, that has vacant, underperforming, and what we might call in need of TLC storefronts.
Mhm.
So that's almost every place. And we come up with broad strategies and designs to not only figure out how to work on the scale of some of these individual storefronts, but how to figure out the policies that help to bring things to the next level. As I said, we just worked with Corsicana, Texas, which is as good of a case study as it could have been because you have multiple sub-districts of amazing storefronts in Corsicana. But we also, looks like before January is over, we're going to be working on multiple other projects for this. So I would encourage people to check it out, to reach out to us. Sometimes people are ready to do something. Sometimes it might be for a few months, but we are, and we are even, talking to people internationally, who've had some success in helping to do this type of program. So we're really trying to learn from everybody because surprisingly, there's not much in the United States where they've really figured out how to scale this in a way to come into any town and really say, let's come up with a comprehensive strategy. And if we need to bring in an A team of people, like I said, if you need crowdfunding help, if you need small business support, if you need other types of creative help, we can help to come in. Very closely related to this is, I mentioned right now I'm in Duncanville, Texas. I'm in a space with this guy, Monty Anderson. Monty is a developer who has lived and worked his entire life in the southern sector of Dallas. He's like 65 years old. His whole developer career has been in the southern sector of Dallas, which is generally sort of the more disinvested side. There's exceptions. And generally has very little what we might call traditional urban fabric. There's not a lot of downtowns and stuff like that, either within the city limits of Dallas or in the near suburbs. There's some, but there's not much.
Okay.
He had to say, okay, we don't have a lot of money and we don't have this great urban fabric. And I need to make great urbanism. I need to make great experiences for people. What do I do? And one of the reasons why, so he only develops within Southern Dallas, but he's nationally, he's part of this group Neighborhood Evolution.
Okay.
So in many cases, I'm focusing on helping to bring Monty and his team in to places. And and what I'm finding is that the Neighborhood Evolution resources and the Storefront Renaissance League resources are a very good fit with each other. And to give you an idea, Monty's projects, some of them have included, for example, the Grow DeSoto project, which was an old Ace Hardware store in a very kind of nondescript strip shopping center, which is now this amazing small business incubator, micro retail, micro restaurants, all just inside, outside, all sorts of fantastic stuff that you have in what was just basically another strip shopping center. So figuring out how to deal with this particular challenge in a way that's relatively low budget. I was involved in the original planning for that. And without even this being necessarily the original plan, it ended up being about 95% Black-owned businesses. So it's just this really cool gem that people will go and travel to see and experience. And
What
what
is
was
that? What was that called again?
called Grow DeSoto.
Okay.
He's also done this thing, Tyler Station, which was this 110,000 square foot industrial space right on a train station in Dallas, but it had been empty for decades. And now, Tyler Station has co-working, art galleries, a brewery, just all sorts of stuff, a bakery, as well as even light industrial uses all mixed together. It's like a old walled city. It feels like that's right in the middle of the city. So figuring out how to take places that were maybe that people didn't see uses for. And now he's gone places like South Bend, Indiana, like Lafayette, Louisiana, along with his team, Kansas City. They go in and then they help people to actually do this stuff. So I'm bringing him into places. So if you're saying, hey, we have this small town, like we don't want necessarily to just beg the big developer to come in from out of town. And the big developer doesn't want to do the scale stuff we need. Like we need people to rebuild Main Street. We need people to put in, duplexes and quadplexes and storefronts, and to fix things up. We don't necessarily need someone to come in and run roughshod over everything, right? We want to actually help our own people who might have some time, some money, some resources to figure out how they can take the next step. So working with Monty and Nevo, and then working with the Storefront Renaissance League. And when you combine that, it starts to become real strategies for it's like, okay, you're downtown. How do we actually get some momentum and how do we start getting things done? And not just some plan, but how do we actually do things and how do we make what we might call an action strategy for your storefronts, for your downtown, and for your place.
Yeah, I love that. I would love to do more of that myself. I mean, I'm limited here in Germany because of the language barrier. I'm learning, but I don't speak anywhere near the level I need to speak to do anything helpful with the local government. But yeah, I would like to do more of that kind of work myself. So, Rik, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us. I wrote down quite a few things that you said, and I'll have to go back and listen to them again. I feel like there's so many little sound bites that you said, like that these could be little tweetables. Or well, it's not Twitter anymore. What's it called now? I don't know. Xable.
It's like the Sears Tower in Chicago. If it's called anything else, I refuse to call it that.
Anyway, so where can listeners follow you or reach out to you if they would like?
So I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. So the easiest way to reach out if you're on LinkedIn, my first name is Rik. So Rik Adamski, so that's easy enough to find. My spelling is unusual enough that if you just Googled Rik Urban Planner, you'd find me. But you can also check out the Storefront Renaissance League, storefrontleague.com, also ashlime.com, ASHLIME. I say like ash like the ash from a cigarette, lime like the fruit. You can go on my website right there. But yeah, I think the easiest way to reach out to me is probably on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Blue Sky if you're that interested, or just Rik Adamski. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, and you've had some great guests on. So I'm flattered that you thought my ideas might be worth sharing. So thank you.
Yes, you've joined the League of Extraordinary Podcasts. Yes.
Nice. I'm in good company.
All right. As always, thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And thanks again to our generous sponsor, Conveo. Head on over to engagingcities.org, where you can find additional episodes and other helpful resources related to community engagement. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.